Hands that heal Elena had never felt so small in her entire life as she did kneeling beside the wounded cub with 17 apex predators watching her every move. The matriarch Silverback had moved closer now, stepping out from the tree line and approaching with slow and deliberate steps until she stood only 5 meters away, close enough that Elena could see every scar on her silver fur and every ancient wound that told the story of a long and violent life those mercury eyes studied. Elena with an intelligence that made her skin prickle with awareness, because this was not the blank stare of a mindless beast, but the calculating gaze of a thinking creature trying to understand. What it was seeing, the cub whimpered again and tried to lift its head, and Elena gently pressed her hand against its shoulder to keep it still. Easy now. She murmured in a soft voice, "Easy, little one. I'm going to help you, but you need to stay calm." Formish examined the leg more closely and felt her stomach turn at the extent of the damage, because the limb had been crushed badly, probably by falling rocks in the northern canyons, where the terrain was unstable and dangerous bone fragments had torn through muscle and skin. Infection was already spreading through the wound with the aggressive speed of alien bacteria, and without proper treatment the cub would lose the leg at best, and its life at worst. I am not a veterinarian, Elena said quietly to herself as she opened her medical kit and looked at the limited supplies inside. I study behavior and migration patterns. I am not trained for this, but even as she spoke those words, her hands were already moving with a confidence that came from somewhere deep inside her. Somewhere that remembered a different time and a different world. Elena had grown up on a failing farm in the dust belt of Mars, in a small settlement where the nearest real doctor was 3 days away by ground crawler, and the nearest veterinarian might as well have been on another planet entirely when the livestock got sick or injured. You did not call for help and wait, because by the time help arrived, the animal would already be dead. So you learned to handle things yourself with whatever tools and knowledge you could gather. She had set broken bones in cattle, using splints made from scrap metal. She had stitched wounds closed with fishing line when proper sutures were not available. And she had sterilized instruments in engine coolant when the medical supplies ran out. Her mother had taught her that humans could not afford to be specialists anymore, because the universe was too big and too dangerous, and help was always too far away. So every human had to learn how to do everything just in case they were the only one around when something needed doing. Elena reached for the antiseptic spray, hesitated for just a moment as she thought about how precious these supplies were and how far she was from any resupply. And then she pushed that thought aside and began cleaning the wound. The cub yelped and tried to pull away, and Silverback made a deep rumbling sound that might have been concern or warning. But Elena kept working with steady hands and a calm voice. "I know it hurts," she said as she worked. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I have to clean this or the infection will kill you. Just hold on for me, little one. Just hold on." She used her forceps to extract bone fragments one by one, working slowly and carefully to avoid causing more damage than necessary. And the work required every bit of concentration she possessed. The light was fading as the sun dropped toward the horizon, and Elena knew she would need to work through the night if she was going to save this leg. But she did not hesitate or consider stopping. She had made her choice when she walked toward the cub instead of running away, and she would see this through to the end no matter what it cost her. Pack watched in silence as hours passed and the 3 moons of Kethra rose into the sky, casting silver light across the scene that made the Varith fur glow like they were creatures made of starlight and shadow. Elena lost track of time as she worked, falling into a focused state where nothing existed except the wound in front of her and the tools in her hands. And she did not notice when Silverback moved even closer until the massive creature was standing directly beside her. The matriarch lowered her great head and made that strange vibrating sound again, and Elena realized with a start that it was meant to be comforting. a sound that Varth mothers probably made to soothe their young when they were hurt or frightened. "You are trying to help me help your cub," Elena said with wonder in her voice. "You understand what I am doing." She returned to her work with renewed determination. And the night stretched on as she fought to save a life that no human had ever tried to save before it. Some point, the cub snapped at her in reflexive pain as she manipulated the broken bone. And its teeth went right through her glove and into the flesh of her. Elena gasped at the sudden sharp pain, and blood began to flow from the puncture wounds, but she did not pull away or cry out. She simply gritted her teeth and kept working with blood running down her wrist and dripping onto the purple. Grastapak reacted instantly to the scent of human blood, and Silverback rose to her full terrifying height with a sound that was definitely a growl this time. Elena looked up at the massive predator and spoke in a voice that did not waver despite her fear. "It is okay," she said firmly. "Your little one did not mean to hurt me, and I am not angry. We are going to finish this together, do you understand? I am going to save your cub." Silverback studied her for a long moment with those mercury eyes. And then something shifted in the creature's posture. Something that looked almost like respect. The matriarch turned away from Elena and made a series of sharp sounds toward the rest of the pack. And the other Vorith responded by changing their formation completely. They were no longer watching Elena with suspicion and readiness to attack. They were facing outward toward the dark forest with their ears raised and their muscles tense. And Elena realized with a shock what had happened. The pack had decided to trust her. And now they were guarding her while she worked, protecting the small fragile human from any threat that might emerge from the dangerous. Elena felt tears running down her face as she turned back to her work. Because in all her years of studying alien creatures, she had never experienced anything like this moment. She was no longer an outsider being tolerated. She was part of the pack now, accepted and protected. And all because she had chosen to help when no one would have blamed her for running away. The night was long and the work was hard. But Elena was not alone anymore, and somehow that made all the difference in the world. The wounded offering Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 11 months alone on Kethra 7, and she had learned one simple truth about this world. Everything here wanted to kill humans. The plants released toxic spores when touched. The insects carried venom that could stop a human heart in minutes. And the water was filled with parasites that no filter could fully remove. But none of these dangers compared to the Vorth. Vorth were the apex predators of Kethra 7, standing 8 feet tall on powerful legs, covered in silver-white fur that shifted like moonlight when they moved. And their eyes were the most unsettling thing Elena had ever seen. Like pools of frozen mercury that seemed to look right through you and into your soul. The Galactic Xenobiology Council had classified them as Category 9, which meant one thing: observe only, never approach, never make contact, and never ever let them get close to you, because no researcher had ever survived direct contact with a Varth pack. Elena had followed these rules perfectly for 11 months, watching the creatures from a safe distance, recording their hunting patterns, studying their social structure, and never once stepping outside her sealed habitat module when a pack was within 10 kilometers of her position. So, when the juvenile Vorith emerged from the tree line on that warm afternoon, dragging its shattered hind leg across the purple grass, every instinct and every protocol told Elena to retreat inside and seal the doors. She stood frozen at the edge of her camp, her hand resting on the emergency beacon at her belt, watching the young creature struggle toward her with movements that spoke of terrible pain. The cub was maybe half the size of an adult, probably no more than 2 years old, based on the growth patterns Elena had documented. And its left hind leg was a ruined mess of torn flesh and shattered bone that left a dark trail of blood on the grass behind it, collapsed 30 meters from where Elena stood, its chest heaving with exhausted breaths. and those mercury eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her heart twist in her chest. She had seen that look before, many times, in many different creatures across many different worlds. And it was always the same. Not aggression, not fear, but a desperate and silent pleading that needed no translation. The cub was asking for help. Elena took one step forward, then stopped as movement in the tree line caught her attention. And what she saw there made her blood run cold. The rest of the pack was waiting just inside the forest shadows. 17 massive adults arranged in a loose semicircle, their silver fur barely visible against the violet darkness of the alien woods. And every single one of them was watching her, the largest female, a scarred and battle-worn creature that Elena had designated Silverback in her research notes, stood at the center of the formation. Her mercury eyes locked onto Elena with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. Elena understood what was happening, and the realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. The pack had not stumbled upon her camp by accident, and the cub had not wandered here alone seeking random help from a stranger, because the Vorath were intelligent enough to problem solve and communicate, and they had brought their wounded young one to the human on purpose. They knew what she was, or at least they knew something about her that made them believe she could help. Elena's translator device crackled with static, picking up sounds at the edge of its range, and the Vorath were not supposed to have language complex enough for translation. But something was coming through the interference, a single sound, repeated over and over by multiple voices from the pack in the tree. Helpgiver, helpgiver, helpgiver. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes as the meaning sank in, because somehow these creatures had watched her from a distance over the past 11 months. And somehow they had seen enough to form an opinion about what humans were and what humans did. They had seen her tend to her small garden of earth plants, nursing sick seedlings back to health with patient care. And they had seen her repair broken equipment with her clever hands. And maybe they had even seen her capture injured insects in gentle traps and release them far from her camp, rather than simply killing them. Whatever they had witnessed, it had been enough to make them take a desperate gamble on this small and fragile creature from another world. The cub whimpered, a sound so similar to a wounded dog that Elena felt something break inside her chest. And she made her decision in that moment without any more hesitations. She walked forward, slowly and carefully, keeping her hands visible and her movements smooth, until she knelt beside the injured young Vorath in the purple grass up close. The damage was even worse than she had feared, with bone fragments visible through the torn flesh, and the first signs of infection already setting in around the edges of the wound. And Elena knew that without treatment this cub would be dead within days. She looked up at the pack in the tree line, at Silverback watching her with those unreadable mercury eyes. And she spoke in a calm and steady voice, even though her heart was pounding so hard. She could feel it in her throat. "I am going to help," she said, knowing they probably could not understand her words, but hoping they might understand her tone. "And I need you to trust me and stay calm." Silverback made a sound deep in her chest, something between a growl and a whine that vibrated at frequencies Elena could feel in her bones. And the massive predator lowered her head slightly in what might have been acknowledgement. Elena took a deep breath, opened her emergency medical kit, and got to work on the impossible task of saving an alien creature that her own species had classified as too dangerous to approach behind her. The pack settled into watchful positions, 17 apex predators guarding a single human as she worked to save one of their own. And somewhere in the darkening forest, more eyes were watching, drawn by the commotion and the scent of blood. But they would not approach, because even the other predators of Kethra 7 knew better than to challenge a Vorath pack. Elena did not know it yet, but she was about to become a legend that would spread across an entire planet and eventually reach the stars themselves, all because she chose to help when everything told her to run away. The naming the weeks following that long night brought changes that Elena could never have predicted or imagined. The cub healed faster than she had dared to hope, its young body fighting off infection with a strength that amazed her. And within 10 days, it was putting weight on the injured leg and trying to walk short distances. Elena had started calling the cub Ghost because of the pale silver coloring of its underfur, and the name seemed to fit the young creature who had come so close to death only to survive. Against all odds, Ghost became her constant companion in those weeks, following her around the camp with curious eyes and playful energy, learning the boundaries of her habitat module and the routines of her daily life. The rest of the pack did not leave either, setting up a semi-permanent territory in the forest near Elena's camp. And Silverback came to visit almost every day. At first, Elena thought the matriarch was simply checking on the healing cub, but she soon realized that something more complicated was happening. Silverback was watching Elena work, studying her hands as she tended her garden and repaired equipment and prepared her meals. And there was a clear intention behind that observation. The great predator was trying to learn, trying to understand what made this small, fragile creature so different from the other beings of Cathera 7. Elena's translation equipment had improved dramatically during this time, fed by hours and hours of recorded Vorth vocalizations, and she was beginning to understand more of what the creatures were saying to each other. Their language was not like any human language, relying heavily on sounds at frequencies the human ears could barely detect. But there were patterns and meanings that became clearer the more she listened. One word appeared again and again in their communications, a complex sound that her equipment struggled to render into human speech, but that seemed to mean something like hand healer or one who fixes with hands. They were talking about her, spreading the story of what she had done, and Elena began to understand the full significance of this when she made a discovery that changed everything. Vorth memory was not like human memory at all, stored in neurons and electrical signals. It was chemical in nature, encoded in scent markers that could be shared and passed from one generation to the next. What one Vorth knew, it could literally give to another through an exchange of chemical signals. And what it gave would be preserved and passed on to offspring and to pack members for generations to come. This meant that the story of Elena and Ghost would not fade with time like human memories tended to do. It would be preserved perfectly and shared widely until every Vorth on the planet knew what had happened. Elena sat alone in her habitat module one night, recording her thoughts in her research journal, and her voice shook with emotion as she spoke. "Do you understand what this means?" she said to the empty room. "They are not just remembering me as an individual. They are remembering humans as a category. They are encoding the concept of hand healers into their species' memory forever." She paused to wipe tears from her eyes before continuing. "Every Vorth from now until their species ends will know what we did, what we are capable of. They will know that humans are creatures who heal the wounded and fix the broken. And they will remember that we chose to help when we could have chosen to walk away." The implications were staggering and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Elena had come to this world expecting to be a neutral observer, documenting the lives of alien creatures without ever truly touching them. But instead, she had become part of their history in a way that could never be undone. Ghost limped over to where she sat and butted his head against her leg, demanding attention with the entitled attitude of a creature who knew it was loved. And Elena laughed and scratched behind his ears. "You're going to be famous, you know," she told him. "Your story is going to spread across this entire planet." The cub, who was saved by the hand healer Ghost, made a satisfied rumbling sound and pressed closer to her, his eyes half closed with contentment. And Elena felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature controls in her habitat. Silverback arrived the next morning with something in her mouth, a piece of prey that she dropped at Elena's feet with a gesture that was clearly an offering. Elena knew enough about Vorth behavior to understand what this meant. Bringing food was how pack members showed care and acceptance. And Silverback was formally acknowledging Elena as part of her family. "Thank you," Elena said, bowing her head in a gesture of respect. "I am honored to be accepted by your pack." The matriarch made her sound that the translator rendered as hand healer pack friend. And then she did something that no Varth had ever done with a human before. She lowered her great head and pressed her forehead against Elena's chest, holding the contact for several long seconds, while making a low vibrating sound that seemed to reach into Elena's very bones. It was a greeting reserved for the closest of pack bonds, and Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she raised her hands to rest them gently against Silverback's scarred fur. "Will try to be worthy of this honor," she whispered. "I promise I will try in the weeks and months that followed." Elena's reports to the Galactic Xenobiology Council became increasingly detailed and increasingly urgent. She documented everything she was learning about Varth, intelligence and communication and social structure. And she argued passionately that the creatures deserved a new classification that reflected their true nature. They are not mindless predators. She wrote in one report, "They are thinking and feeling beings capable of gratitude and trust, and something that looks very much like love." The council did not respond to her reports with the enthusiasm she had hoped for. But Elena did not let that discourage her. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. She had felt it in the press of Silverback's head against her chest. And she knew that eventually the rest of the galaxy would have to see it too. Ghost grew stronger every day, his leg healing until he could run and jump and play like any healthy young Varth. And Elena watched him with pride that felt like what she imagined a parent might feel. She had saved his life. But in a very real way, he had saved something in her too. He had reminded her why she had become a scientist in the first place. Not for the glory or the publications, but for the wonder of discovering new truths about the universe and the connections that could form across the vast distances of space, the hand healers and the Varth. Elena thought to herself one evening as she watched the sunset paint the sky in colors of purple and gold. What a strange and wonderful combination we make, and somewhere in the chemical memory of an entire species. That thought was being preserved for generations yet to come. The pack grows 3 years had passed since the night Elena saved Ghost's life, and the world of Kethra 7 had changed in ways she never could have imagined. Her small research station had grown into a proper outpost, with additional habitat modules, and better equipment, and even a small landing pad for supply ships. And she was no longer the only human on the Planet A. Team of 6 researchers had joined her over the past year, drawn by her remarkable reports and the opportunity to study the Varth up close. And Elena had taught them all how to interact with the creatures safely and respectfully. Ghost was fully grown now, a magnificent adult Varth who stood nearly 8 feet tall and whose silver fur gleamed in the sunlight like polished metal. But he still came to Elena every day to press his head against her shoulder and make the rumbling sound that meant contentment. He had his own pack now. Young Varth, who followed him through the forests and looked to him for leadership, but he never forgot the human who had saved him when he was small and broken and afraid. Silverback was older and slower than she had been 3 years ago, her muzzle showing the gray of advancing age. But she was still the undisputed matriarch of her pack, and she still visited Elena regularly to share food and exchange greetings. The relationship between humans and Varth had spread beyond Elena's original pack, carried by the chemical memory system that ensured no Varth would ever forget. The hand healers packs from across the continent had come to investigate, to meet the humans and verify for themselves what the memories told them. And every single one had left with the same conclusion. These strange small creatures were worthy of trust and respect. Elena had documented 47 different packs accepting humans as pack friends, a designation that no other species in the galaxy had ever received from the Varth. And the Galactic Council had finally started paying attention to her research. Then the disaster came, the colony ship Meridians. Hope was carrying 400 human settlers to a world on the far side of Vara space when its engines suffered catastrophic failure. And the ship began breaking apart in orbit above Cathra 7. Elena was working in her laboratory when the emergency broadcast came through, and she ran outside to see the sky filled with falling lights as escape pods rained down across the continent. Oh no! She breathed, watching the streaks of fire spread across the horizon. There are so many of them. Her team gathered around her with fear on their faces, because they all knew what this meant. 400 humans were now scattered across one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, stranded in small groups without proper equipment or supplies. And rescue ships would not arrive for at least 18 months, even with the friendly relationship Elena had built with the local packs. There was no way to protect so many people spread across such a vast area. We have to help them. One of her researchers said, "We have to do something." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a sound rose from the forest that made everyone fall silent. It was Silverback, raising her great head toward the sky and letting out a howl that seemed to shake the very air. A call that was picked up and repeated by Ghost and his pack, and then by other voices further away. Elena had never heard this sound before, but she knew instinctively what it meant. The matriarch was summoning the packs, calling them together for a purpose that no Vorath had ever called them for before. And they were answering from every direction. Within hours, the area around Elena's outpost was filled with Vorath. Dozens of packs that had traveled from across the continent, and they were all looking at Elena with those mercury eyes that held something like determination. The hand healers people need help. Elena's translator rendered Silverback's vocalizations. "We will help them as she helped us." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as the meaning of those words sank in 3 years ago. She had made a choice to help a wounded cub instead of running away. A small act of compassion that had seemed so simple at the time. And now that choice was coming back to her, multiplied 1,000 times over. "They are going to help," Elena reported to the emergency channel that was broadcasting from the Meridian's Hope survivors. "The Vorath packs are mobilizing. They are going to find your people and protect them." There was silence on the channel for a long moment, and then a voice came through filled with disbelief. "Are saying that the apex predators of Cathra 7 are going to rescue humans instead of eating them." "Yes," Elena said with a smile spreading across her face. "That is exactly what I am saying." The days that followed were filled with stories that seemed impossible. Tales that would be told and retold across the galaxy for generations to come. Varvarth packs spread out across the continent, following the scent trails of humans and tracking down every single escape pod that had landed. And when they found survivors, they did not attack. They protected them. Families huddled in broken pods, watched in amazement as massive predators took up positions around their crash sites, guarding them through the long, dangerous nights and driving away the other creatures of Cathra 7 that would have seen humans as easy prey. A group of injured survivors was guided to fresh water by a pack that walked slowly so the wounded could keep up. And when one man collapsed from exhaustion, a Vorath carried him on her back for 3 kilometers until they reached the water source. A 7-year-old girl named Maya became separated from her family when their escape pod broke apart during landing. And she was found 2 days later riding on Silverback's own back, laughing and playing with the ancient matriarch's ears. Ghost led his pack to a crash site where a fire had broken out, and the Vorath worked alongside the human survivors to dig. A firebreak that saved everyone's lives every day, brought new stories of cooperation and protection, and something that looked very much like friendship forming between 2 species that should have been enemies when the rescue ships finally arrived. 18 months later, not a single one of the 400 survivors had been lost to the dangers of Cathra 7. The Galactic Council demanded an explanation, And Elena submitted her final report with a conclusion that she had been working toward for 3 years. We are humans. She wrote, and when something is broken, we fix it. When something is hurt, we heal it. When something is afraid, we protect it. This is who we are, and this is what we do. The Vorath observed us, and they remembered what they saw, and they decided. In whatever way their species decides things that creatures like us were worth keeping and protecting in return. The council spent weeks debating before they finally issued their ruling, reclassifying the Vorath from Category 9 extremely dangerous to Category 2 protected allies, and establishing Cathra 7 as a joint human Vorath preserve. Elena stood outside her outpost on the day the announcement was made, surrounded by her team and by Ghost and Silverback and what felt like half the Vorath packs on the planet. We did it, she said softly, reaching out to touch Silverback's short fur. We actually did it. The matriarch made a sound that needed no translation, a sound of pride and satisfaction and love. And then she pressed her forehead against Elena's chest one more time in the chemical memory of every Vorath on Cathra 7. The story of the hand healers was complete now. Not just the tale of one human saving one cub, but the epic of two species learning to trust each other against all odds, and in that memory, preserved forever and passed down through generations. A single idea burned bright like a star that would never fade. Family was not just about blood or species or world of origin. Family was about choosing to help when you could choose to walk away, and the hand healers and the Vorath had chosen each other. That was enough to change everything. That was enough to change the galaxy itself. The long night, 7 hours passed under the silver light of 3 moons while Elena worked to save the young Vorath's leg. Her back ached from kneeling in the same position for so long. Her eyes burned from the strain of working in dim light, and her wounded hand throbbed with every heartbeat. But she did not stop, and she did not slow down. The bone had to be set perfectly, or the cub would never walk properly again. And Elena refused to accept anything less than the best outcome she could achieve. She used splinting materials from her emergency kit, following techniques she had learned from a veterinary textbook she had downloaded years ago, on a whim when she had some spare credits and nothing better to spend them on. At the time, she had thought it was a waste of money, since she was a behavioral scientist and not an animal doctor. But now she silently thanked her past self for that random decision that had turned out to be so important. The antiseptic was running low, and Elena had to make choices about how much to use, knowing that she might need some later for her own injuries. But also knowing that the cub needed it more than she did right now, she chose to use almost all of it, keeping only a tiny amount in reserve, because she had not come this far just to lose the battle against infection at the last moment. Pack remained in their protective formation throughout the night, facing outward into the darkness with their senses alert for any threat. And Elena found comfort in their presence, even though she knew that any other human would have been terrified to be surrounded by so many apex predators. She had started thinking of them as allies instead of dangers, as partners in this desperate effort to save a young life. And that shift in her thinking felt right in a way she could not fully explain. Silverback stayed close beside her the entire time, watching every move Elena made with those intelligent mercury eyes, and sometimes the great matriarch would make soft sounds that seemed almost like encouragement. You are a good mother, Elena said during one brief rest when she stopped to flex her cramped fingers. Your pack is lucky to have you leading them. Silverback tilted her massive head at the sound of Elena's voice, and for a moment their eyes met with something that felt like understanding passing between them. The cub drifted in and out of consciousness as Elena worked, sometimes whimpering with pain, and sometimes falling into an exhausted sleep. And Elena talked to it constantly in a low and soothing voice. She told it about Earth and about Mars and about all the places she had traveled in her life as a xenobiologist. She told it about her childhood on the dusty farm and her mother who had taught her that helping others was the most important thing a person could do. And she told it about the stars and the vastness of space and all the wonders she had seen. The cub probably could not understand her words, but it seemed to respond to the sound of her voice, growing calmer whenever she spoke and becoming restless whenever she fell silence. So Elena kept talking even when her throat grew dry and her voice started to crack, because the cub needed her and she would not let it down as the night wore on. Elena found herself thinking about what this moment meant in a larger sense, about what it said about humans and about the universe and about the connections that could form between beings from different worlds. The Galactic Council had dozens of names for humanity, and most of them were not kind or flattering death riddles they called humans, because Earth was classified as a high-gravity, high-danger world that should not have been able to produce intelligent life at all. Persistence predators they called humans, because ancient humans had hunted by simply following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, walking and running for hours and days without stopping. The species too stupid to know when to quit they called humans, because humans had a strange habit of attempting impossible things and refusing to give up even when failure seemed certain. Elena had always felt a little defensive about these names, a little embarrassed by the way other species talked about her kind, but tonight she was starting to see them differently. Maybe being too stubborn to quit was not such a bad thing after all. Maybe there was strength in refusing to give up even when the odds were against you. And maybe the galaxy needed creatures who would keep trying when everyone else had already walked away. The first light of dawn was beginning to color the eastern sky when Elena finally finished her work. The bone was set and splinted securely. The wound was cleaned and sealed with bioadhesive that would protect it while it healed, and she had injected the cub with antibiotics that she hoped would work on Vorith biology, even though she could not be certain. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she had accomplished. An exhaustion hit her like a wave crashing against rocks. The cub was going to live. She was almost sure of it, and if she had done everything right, then it would even be able to walk and run again. Once the bone healed, tears spilled down her cheeks as the tension of the long night finally released, and she could not try to stop them or hide them. The cub lifted its head weakly and looked at her with those mercury eyes that now held something warm and trusting. And then it did something that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It licked her wounded hand with a tongue that felt like warm sandpaper. Gentle and careful, cleaning the dried blood from her skin with the same care she had shown while tending to its injuries. Elena laughed through her tears at the gesture, understanding that this was the cub's way of saying thank you, and she reached out with her other hand to stroke the soft fur between its ears. "You are welcome, little one," she whispered. "You are very welcome." And then from the pack around her, from 17 massive predators who had watched over her through the darkest hours of the night, a new sound began to rise. It started low and deep, building slowly in power and complexity. Voices joining together in a harmony that seemed to resonate with something ancient and primal in Elena's chest. The Vorith were singing, and the song was for her. And it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard in her entire life. Anna closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. And she knew that this moment would stay with her forever, no matter where her life took her from here. She had come to Kethra 7 as a scientist seeking to observe and document. But she was leaving this night as something more, something that had no name in any language she knew. She had become part of something larger than herself, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.